The problem is if they stop trading oil, which is the thing that runs the world, in dollars, you're going to see overnight you can't fill a wheelbarrow with money fast enough to go buy yourself a loaf of bread. That's the issue we're going to have. We're able to do all this and inflate our money like we can because everybody else is using our money.
But if someone tried to do that, our military is so powerful and we have so much. Correct. That's the only reason it hasn't happened. It's the only reason it hasn't happened.
We have the biggest military. And I think
by far.
The thing that's weird to consider too, and I had somebody mention this to me the other day, is like we have military bases in the UK, we have them
everywhere,
but nobody has military bases here, which I thought is kind of weird. That was me on Next Level Soul podcast. If you came here from that appearance, welcome. Alex and I went 2 hours on Rome, the Vatican, and the patterns that drive empire collapse. I made a few factual errors in that appearance, and I cleaned them up on the Roman pattern companion to the same episode. The link's below. If you want the historical corrections, they're at the top of the video. This one is focused on the architecture argument, specifically why Rome's collapse pattern is the same pattern operating in America right now, and why if you only learn one thing from Rome's 3,000-year history, it should be this. 3 patterns killed Rome. Not barbarians, not Christianity, not lead pipes. 3 institutional patterns that compounded over 300 years. Military loyalty transferred from state to individual, and a permanent administrative class that outlived every political collapse. Every one of those patterns is running in America right now. It started in 1913, and it's compounding faster than Rome's version because the technology is faster. Let me walk you through the 3, and you'll understand why the Hidden Forces in History audience is the audience that has to be paying attention to this right now. So here's pattern 1, money. This is the leading edge of every empire in collapse, and Rome is the cleanest version of this case study. Roman currency was silver. Specifically the denarius, which was 95% pure silver under Augustus, and held that purity for about 150 years. Then it started to slip. In 170 under Marcus Aurelius, the denarius about 80% silver. By 240 under Gordian III, 45% silver. By 260, 15%. By 280, less than 5%. The coin that was almost pure silver was now mostly bronze with a thin silver coating. And that coating flaked off in your hand. You could rub a Roman coin with your thumb and watch the silver come off right on your fingers. So Romans knew. This wasn't a modern invisible debasement. They could literally see and feel their money getting worse. They started hoarding gold. They returned to the barter system. Black markets formed for basic goods because the official currency didn't hold value long enough to plan around. Now compared to 2026, the US dollar has lost about 97% of its purchasing power since the Federal Reserve was created in 1913. Since the pandemic, roughly 80% of the M2 money supply has been printed. Our debasement is invisible because it's electronic. There's no coin to rub, but the mechanism is identical. And our adjustment is starting to look identical as well. Gold crossed $5,000 an ounce. Silver crossed $100. Americans are converting dollars to hard assets the same way Romans converted denarii to gold coins they'd hoard for decades. Rome took 250 years to do most of its monetary debasement. America has done most of its work in about 50 years. Here's me on Next Level Soul on the Roman version of the mechanism. Septimius Severus, he's the first black emperor, by the way. He's from North Africa. And he creates a little bit of stability for a while. His son, quite famous, Caracalla is his name, and he's actually in the new Gladiator movie. Probably would have looked much more Northern African and not blonde-haired, blue-eyed with I guess they gave him a gold tooth too in this movie coming out. Why not? So, and he's actually a very good military leader, Caracalla, which is another thing that I've seen the previews. They don't show you in that movie. The name Caracalla actually comes from the type of cloak he wore. It was called a Caracalla. So that's where his name actually comes from. In 212, Caracalla takes all of the people in the provinces of Rome and gives 30 million people citizenship overnight. So now you have this idea of citizenship is watered down, and you have all these military commanders fighting each other So what do you need? Well, you need more troops. So they start bringing in the barbarian troops to fight in their armies. So now the armies are less Roman and more barbarian. Well, what do you need to pay an army? Well, you need money. So what do they do with the money? They start bringing devaluing the, and it's different than it is now, where it's like ones and zeros in a computer. They're literally like resmelting it and shaving pieces, bringing in different metals. So you have inflation is kind of going crazy. You have the empire is becoming less and less Roman. And what happens now from kind of the 3rd century until like the 284 is it is chaos. And the empire should have fallen apart on like 3 or 4 separate occasions. Now the first clip. Monetary debasement is the leading indicator. Every empire that's collapsed in recorded history started its collapse right here. But money debasement alone doesn't kill the empire. It just signals that something deeper is happening. The second pattern is what actually breaks the entire system. So here's pattern 2, military loyalty. This is the part that most modern Americans don't understand because we live inside a stable professional military, and we forget how recently that was a controversial design by choice. In the Roman Republic, legions were citizen soldiers. You'd report for a specific campaign. You'd fight. You'd go home. And you'd be a farmer again. Your loyalty was to Rome as a state, because Rome as a state is what you were going home to. That all changed in 107 BC. A general named Gaius Marius needed to raise an army for a war against Jugurtha in North Africa. By the way, my friend Alex Petkist likes to say Jugurtha, so if you're here from Cost of Glory, hello. And he couldn't find enough citizen soldiers. So he opened recruitment to the landless poor, men who had nothing to go home to, and then he paid them professionally. The Marian reforms. From that moment on, Rome had a permanent standing professional army. And here's what nobody told them at the time. The payment and the pension came from the general, not the state. Veterans were paid off with land, and the land was seized by the general who led them. So if you were a legionary under Caesar, or under Pompey, or later Augustus, your retirement depended on the general winning. Your loyalty went to the man, not to Rome. That's the shift. That's what's made every Roman civil war of the next 150 years possible. And by the 3rd century, the Roman military was no longer a Roman military. It was a collection of private armies wearing Roman uniforms, answerable to whichever general could pay them the most. Now apply the pattern forward. The modern American military is professional, volunteer, career, and that's fine. It's how every modern state fields an effective force. But the test isn't peacetime loyalty. The test is who the senior officers class actually answers to once they retire. Defense contractors, think tanks, lobbying firms. The revolving door between the Pentagon and the defense contractor class is the Marian reforms wearing a suit. Your general's post-service income depends on who they served well in office. That's the same incentive structure that broke Rome. Here's me on Next Level Soul on the Roman version. So in 284, you get the great reformer Diocletian. He's kind of one of the last 3 that's going to rule over the United Empire. You're going to have him, you're going to have Constantine, you're going to have Theodosius that really rule the United Empire. But he's the great reformer. So what he ends up doing is he creates the tetrarchy. So that's the rule by 4 emperors now. He also reforms the monetary system because by 284, they had 15,000% inflation. Because you're paying for all these troops. Of course. And that's something Rome's never going to recover from, by the way. There's I would definitely tell the people watching to go check out some graphs on this because it's going to freak you out. So he does these reforms and things get good for a little bit and it's kind of stable through Constantine, but you just have the same problem of now you're fighting off barbarian tribes. We go right back to emperors raising armies and killing each other. So it's this whole instability, inflation, and eventually what ends up happening by 410, Rome gets sacked by the Visigoth Alaric. And after 410, they're paying annual tribute to the Goths. Basically, they're just giving them money every year to not attack them. So the last about 70 years of the Roman Empire, you have emperors that are in power in name only. Half of them are children, and they're actually just being controlled by barbarian kings. So in 476, this general named Odoacer ends up taking the last emperor, his name is Romulus Augustus, and says, okay, so I know you're a kid, I know you think you're boss, but you're going to retire. So they put him into retirement, they end the empire, they actually give him they They give him money every year, like give him an allowance. And
that's where the stipend.
That's where the kingdom of Italy starts. So you have several very strong Italian kings. You have Odoacer, you have Theodoric. But this whole idea of the fall of Rome, the Eastern Emperor Justinian ends up wanting to reunite the empire and put it all back together. So what does he do? He raises an army, sends his general Belisarius into Rome to bring it back. He attacks Theodoric and his Goths, and he burns it down in order to save it. And that ends up being like how your actual like fall of Rome happens.
The fire and everything like that.
Right.
And then, all right, so now...
As I said, there's a lot to that's trying to get where you got there.
Okay, all right, so now Rome is burning, as they say. And after the fall of Rome...
The second clip. Money debasement undermines the currency. Military reform undermines state loyalty. But still neither one of these kills the empire. It takes the third pattern to do that. And the third pattern is the one the Hidden Force viewers should be watching most carefully right now. Pattern 3, the institutional class. The permanent administrative apparatus that exists underneath the visible political layer and outlasts every political collapse. In Rome, the most visible version was the Praetorian Guard, originally created by Augustus as a personal bodyguard. Within a couple of generations, the Praetorian Guard wasn't protecting emperors. It was making and unmaking them. Out of the 77 Roman emperors, the Praetorian Guard killed at least 17. They installed Claudius after murdering Caligula. They sold the title at auction in 193 after killing Pertinax. They were the institutional class that operated above the political class. But the Praetorian Guard was just the dramatic example. The deeper version was the entire Roman administrative apparatus. The diocese system that Diocletian built in the 280s, the provincial governors, the treasury officials, the legal system, none of that turned over when the emperors changed. And none of it was elected. None of it answered to political accountability in any meaningful sense. It was the permanent Rome that operated under the visible Rome. When the visible Rome collapsed in 476, the permanent Rome kept operating, just under new management. The Catholic Church inherited the diocese system, the legal forms, the administrative hierarchy, the religious political fusion. Same paperwork, different uniform. Now let's apply this forward. America has a visible political layer. Presidents, Congress, elections every 2 and 4 years. And it has a permanent administrative layer that doesn't change with elections. The Federal Reserve, the FBI, the CIA, the NSA, the State Department's career staff, the Defense Department's relationship with its contractor class, the Justice Department's standing investigations and political priorities. These institutions outlast every administration. They have their own internal cultures, their own succession mechanisms, their own funding streams that don't require political reauthorization to continue. They're already part of America that survives when the political layer turns over. They're already trained to be the institution that inherits. So here's me on Next Level Soul on the Praetorian dynamics. The third clip. So in 312, there's a battle called Milvian Bridge.
Okay.
This is kind of right after, so Diocletian is emperor in 284 to about 305, I think. Mm-hmm. And he splits up the empire. So the empire had a tendency to split up between East and West, but he actually officially splits it up because it's just too big for some one person rule. So you have a senior emperor in the West and a senior emperor in the East and a junior emperor in the West and a junior emperor in the East. What would happen is now you have all these emperors. Well, they start fighting each other for who's kind of the big cheese.
Of course.
You know, El Grande Formaggio. So they're kind of like fighting for who's in charge. And Constantine is fighting against another emperor who he actually basically, you know, wants to be the big cheese, and he's kind of the final guy to actually reunite Rome before it breaks up again. And this battle of Milvian Bridge, it's right outside of the city of Rome. He has this vision, and in the vision he sees under this sign you will conquer, and he sees the two Greek letters chi and rho. That's like the P and the X that we see. So he takes this, and it's a Christian symbol. So he has all his soldiers put it on their shield, and he wins the Battle of Milvian Bridge. So for him, after that, he likely starts practicing as a Christian.
I'm all in.
Yeah, but he doesn't actually become baptized until he is on his deathbed. Because during that time period, it was different too, because they saw baptism as removing your sins. And so, you might as well get them all in before you wipe them away, right?
Right.
So they would wait. A lot of times they were waiting to the end of their life to get baptized. So Christianity doesn't become the Roman religion, and only about 2% of the empire is Christian at this point in time. It just, for him, it ends up working out.
Oh, okay. So it wasn't
before this too. Yeah. He had actually worshipped a god called Sol Invictus, or the immortal sun, which is, if you look up Sol Invictus, the symbology is very similar to like the idea of Christ. So for him, the change wasn't that dramatic to actually go from Sol Invictus to Jesus Christ. 3 patterns: money, military, institutions. Each one built on top of the last. Each one accelerating the next. And every single one of them is running in America right now. Only faster, because the technology is faster, and the institutional class is more sophisticated than Rome's ever was. Now the timeline. Because if you understand Rome's 3 patterns took 300 years to compound, from the Marian reforms in 107 to the 3rd century crisis around 235, you need to understand what 110 years of compounding looks like in modern America. We've been running this since 1913. 3 things happened in 1913. The Federal Reserve gave a private banking cartel the power to issue currency. The 16th Amendment authorized federal income tax. The 17th Amendment ended state representation in the Senate, a permanent funding source, unlimited money creation, the structural checks removed. That's the 3-legged stool of every empire in history, assembled in a single year. And Wilson, he signed all 3. Then it accelerates. FDR confiscates private gold in 1933 at $20 an ounce, then revalues it at $35 an ounce, one of the largest property transfers in American history, executed by the federal government against its own citizens. Nixon closes the gold window in 1971. The dollar becomes pure fiat, backed by nothing but the full faith and credit of the federal government that has been running deficits on autopilot ever since. Today, we're at $35 trillion in debt and accelerating. We're losing the petrodollar. The BRICS countries are building parallel currency infrastructure. We're weaponizing the dollar against our rivals, Russia, Iran, China, which teaches every other country in the world that holding US dollars is a strategic vulnerability. Other countries are converting reserves to gold and non-dollar trade settlement. That's the money pattern accelerating. Meanwhile, the institutional class has consolidated. The administrative state employs roughly 2 million federal workers, plus another 4 million indirectly through contracts. The Federal Registrar publishes about 3,000 new regulations per year, none of which require congressional authorization. The intelligence apparatus operates with its own classification regime that keeps its actual activities permanently hidden from the political class that supposedly oversees it. The judicial branch has assumed effective veto power over the executive policy through district court injunctions. Rome took 3 centuries. America has done most of the work in just over a century. Here's me on Next Level Soul on the modern parallel.
All right, so as far as Rome is concerned, how does Rome compare to, the fall of Rome compared to where we are in our timeline? Yeah.
So I think the thing, once again, is if you look at what killed Rome, there's so many different things, right? Like, if you read the Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire by Edward Gibbon, you would think that the entire world caused the fall of Rome. But if it's really 2 major things, and that's inflation and immigration. So I think what you need to take a look at is there's no problem with people coming to a country. Yeah. But the problem is if you inflate the system too fast and the money's losing value, well, then the people coming in don't really have buy-in to the system. And as the system collapses, well, they don't need the system anymore. And that's the same thing that happened in Rome. So I think what it comes down to is just getting a handle on borders and getting a handle on your money, right? And I think if you can handle those 2 things, you're in better shape. But once again, are we going to? I don't know. It's because if you don't have borders, you don't have a country. And if you don't have a currency, you don't have a country. So it's a real difficult place to be in. And that is what killed the Roman Empire.
So is there anything we can do or anything we can see that Rome did wrong that we can try to fix along our path, brother?
well, you're going to want to get yourself some seeds.
Invest in bullets and toilet paper is what you're saying?
No, I'm just like, I think what it comes down to, and because here's what you have to understand too, is people talk about Rome falling from debauchery and all this and all that. And if you look at it, like at the end, it was a Christian empire. They were likely the best they had been in a long time. So the thing you have to consider is they got too far down the road where they couldn't put it back together. And I think we're very close to that as well. And I think that the problem people do is they get too into red team, blue team, and, this one's going to save me or that one's going to save me. And what it really comes down to is getting involved locally, working with your neighbors. The fourth clip, that's where we are. Money debasement well underway. Military loyalty structures bent towards defense contractor patrons rather than the state. A permanent administrative class that operates underneath every administration. 3 patterns, all running. Now, the question that nobody on the political layer wants to answer. This is the open question of the American century. It's the question the hidden forces in history audience needs to be wrestling with, because the political media establishment will not acknowledge it exists. Rome's 3 patterns compounded for centuries until the visible political layer eventually collapsed in 476. When it did, something inherited the institutional architecture. In Rome's case, it was the Catholic Church. The church was already there, already trained, already authorized, with its own hierarchy, operating in parallel to the political administration. When the political administration walked away, the church took the offices. The Vatican is what happened. Same buildings, same paperwork, different uniform. The question for America is, when the political layer eventually fails, and it will, because every political layer eventually fails, who or what is already there, already trained, already authorized to inherit the institutional architecture? Look at the candidates honestly. The permanent administrative state, already inside the building, already in the offices, already holds the institutional knowledge, and doesn't require political authorization to keep operating. This is the leading candidate. This is what most informed observers actually expect to inherit. The technology corporations. Silicon Valley already runs the information infrastructure of the country, already operates effective censorship and amplification mechanisms that exceed anything any government has ever built. It already has direct access to citizens' data, communication, and behavior at a granularity that Rome's emperors couldn't have imagined. Foreign powers. China is positioning. The BRICS bloc is building a parallel financial infrastructure. The European Union is building a parallel regulatory authority over the American tech corporations, or some combination thereof. The post-American architecture is unlikely to be a cohesive successor. More likely, it's a fragmented inheritance. The administrative state remains domestic operational control. Technology corporations control information and money flow. Foreign powers control the international order. 3 Roman successor states emerging from one collapse. This is the question, and this is what Hidden Forces in History is actually about. Not history, the architecture of the present, trace forward. Here's me on Next Level Soul landing the closer. The 5th clip.
The fall of the Soviet Union.
I don't know as much about the Soviet history out there, so I don't want to speak out of turn on it.
From my understanding, their dollar collapsed, and
that's what kills empires.
And then the whole thing just went down.
Right. If there's no money, there's no empire.
So that's something that I want people to listening to understand, that you're right. The money of the country is what runs the country. Without that money or perceived value.
If you came here from Next Level Soul, thank Alex for me. He runs one of the smartest pattern recognition shows on the internet, and his audience is exactly the audience this argument is built for. This channel, Hidden Forces in History, is where I do the full architecture argument every Wednesday. Season 1 right now is about money and power, Jekyll Island, the Rothschilds, the Venetian blueprint, how the Federal Reserve actually works. The playlist is linked below. Start with the primer. If you want the Rome side of this same Next Level Soul conversation, the Vatican Inherits Rome story, that's the companion video on my other channel, The Roman Pattern. It's also linked below. 2 channels, 1 argument, 2 lenses. My next video drops on Wednesday. Subscribe and you'll watch the architecture argument develop in real time, week by week. You weren't taught this, and that's the point. I'm Jeremy Ryan Slate. This has been Hidden Forces in History. I'll see you Wednesday.